Let's talk about what we know and what we don't know about aggression and criminal behavior. Aggression is behavior that has as its goal the infliction of harm upon another person who is in turn motivated to avoid the harm. What do you think about accidental harm? Does it fall under this definition? Typically, no. It is not generally thought of as aggressive because it is not intended. Additionally, harm that is a byproduct of helpful intentions is also not considered aggressive because the person doing harm believes that the target is not motivated to avoid the action, such as a dentist. With that said, it makes sense that all violence is aggressive, but not all instances of aggression can be considered violent. Additionally, the terms violence and aggression don't necessarily mean a crime was committed. Aggression can be divided into two types. Effective or hostile aggression is impulsive or thoughtless and usually driven by anger. Ultimately, the goal is to harm someone. Instrumental aggression is a premeditated means of obtaining some goal other than just harming the victim. This may be through self-defense or aggressive military action. These terms are not mutually exclusive. For example, both robbery and physical assault are considered forms of aggression because the intent is to harm the target, but they differ in the ultimate goal. With robbery, it is a profit-based goal, and an assault is a harm-based goal. One of the biggest social psychology studies on obedience to authority figures ever was the Milgram obedience study. Participants were always given the role of teacher and were put in a separate room from the learner. Can you think of why they did this? The teacher was then given a list of word pairs which he was to teach the learner. The teacher began by reading the list of word pairs to the learner. The teacher would then read the first word of each pair and read 4 possible answers. The learner would press a button to indicate his response. If the answer was incorrect, the teacher would administer a shock to the learner, with the voltage increasing in 15-volt increments for each wrong answer. If correct, the teacher would read the next word pair. It's important to know that the subjects really believed that the learner was getting shocked each time they got an answer wrong. And they were also reassured that they were not held responsible for the pain or shock received by the learner. If at any time the subject indicated his desire to halt the experiment, he was given a succession of verbal prods by the experimenter, in this order. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. If the subject still wished to stop after all 4 successive verbal prods, the experiment was halted. Otherwise, it was halted after the subject had given the maximum 450-volt shock 3 times in succession. The study measured the willingness of participants to obey an authority figure who instructed them to perform these acts that conflicted with their personal conscience. What they found was that in the first set, 65% of participants gave the full 450-volt shock. And future studies have been consistent, showing that 61 to 66% of participants typically give the full volt shock. Another famous experiment was the Stanford prison experiment. It was run by Philip Zimbardo, who was a classmate of Milgram, who wanted to explore the impact of becoming a prisoner or prison guard. He explained, "Suppose you had only kids who were normally healthy, psychologically and physically, and they knew that they would be going into a prison-like environment and that some of their civil rights would be sacrificed. Would those good people put in that bad, evil place, would their goodness triumph? Zimbardo set up a mock prison in the basement of Stanford's psychology building. The research participants were students selected from a larger pool of 70 students because they had no criminal background, lacked psychological issues, and had no major medical conditions. The participants selected as prisoners stayed in the mock prison 24 hours a day, while the guards were assigned to work in 3-man teams for an 8-hour shift. While the participants were able to interact in any way they wanted, the interactions were generally hostile or even dehumanizing. The guards began to behave in ways that were aggressive and abusive towards the prisoners, while the prisoners became passive and depressed. 5 of the prisoners began to experience such severe negative emotions, including crying and acute anxiety, that they had to be released from the study early. Even the researchers themselves began to lose sight of the reality of the situation. Zimbardo, who acted as the prison warden, overlooked the abusive behavior of the prison guards until graduate student Christina Mauslak voiced objections to the conditions in the simulated prison and the morality of continuing the experiment. The experiment was supposed to last 14 days, but stopped after 6 because the guards became abusive and the prisoners began to show signs of extreme stress and anxiety. Here is a clip of Zimbardo discussing his infamous study.
Most of the evil in the world comes about not out of evil motives, but somebody saying, get with the program, be a team player. When a person feels, I am not personally responsible, I am not accountable, it's the role I'm playing, or these are the orders I've gotten, then you allow yourself to do things you would never do under ordinary circumstances.
I began to feel that I was losing my identity, that the person that I call Clay, the person who put me in this place, the person who volunteered to go into this prison, because it was a prison to me, it still is a prison to me. I don't look on it as an experiment or a simulation. It's just a prison that was run by psychologists instead of run by the state. I had really thought that I was incapable of this kind of behavior. I was surprised, I was dismayed to find out that I could really be that I could act in a manner so absolutely unaccustomed to anything I would even really dream of doing. And while I was doing it, I didn't feel any regret. I didn't feel any guilt. It was only afterwards when I began to reflect on what I had done that this behavior began to dawn on me, and I realized that this was a part of me I hadn't really noticed before.
I feel so up inside. I feel really up inside. You don't know. I gotta go. I need to a doctor, anything. I can't see that. I'm up. I don't know how to explain it. I'm up inside. God damn it. Up. You don't know. I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside. Don't you know? I can't take it. The scene you just saw was at the end of only 36 hours into the study. Each day after that, another prisoner had a similar reaction. And so at the end of 5 days, we had 5 kids. Kids we chose because they were normal and healthy, having emotional breakdowns.
You put a uniform on and are given a role, a job, saying your job is to keep these people in line, then you're certainly not the same person as if you're in street clothes and in a different role. You really become that person. Once you put on that khaki uniform, you put on the glasses, you take the nightstick, and you act the part. That's your costume,
and you have to act accordingly when you put it on.
It harms me.
Why?
I mean, in the present tense, it harms me.
How did it harm you? How does it harm you? Just to think about it, mean that people can be like that?
It let me in on some knowledge that I've never experienced firsthand. I've read about it. I've read a lot about it. But I've never experienced it firsthand. I've never seen someone turn that way. And I know you're a nice guy. You know? You understand? I do. I do know you're a nice guy. I don't get that because I know what you can turn into.
It surprised me that no one said anything to stop me. No one said, Kermit, you can't say those things to me. Those things are sick. Nobody said that. They just accepted what I said. I said, you know, go tell that man to the face he's the scum of the earth, and they'd do it without question. They'd do push-ups without question. They'd sit in the hole. They'd abuse each other. And here they're supposed to have they're supposed to be together as a unit in jail, but here they're abusing each other because I requested them to, and no one questioned my authority at all. And it really shocked me. Why didn't people, when I started to get abuse people so much, I started to get so profane that, and still people didn't say anything.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
As soon as I realized that 819 could hear this, I rushed to the room where I had left him. And what I found was a boy crying hysterically, while in the background his fellow prisoners were chanting and yelling that he is a bad prisoner, and that they were being punished because of him.
Because of what prisoner 819 did, myself and the rest. Because of what prisoner 819 did, myself and the rest.
Well, I'm trying to comfort this young man, and he says, I have to go back. I said, what do you mean? I have to prove to them I'm not a bad prisoner. And at this point he said, no, you're not a bad prisoner. You're Stu, and I'm not the superintendent. I'm Phil Zimbardo. The study is over. And he kept saying, no, I have to go back. I'm not a bad prisoner. And so the reality of that prison was so deep that even when I'm giving him the opportunity to leave, his reputation, his image as a bad prisoner has to be undone, has to be reconciled. When we released the first prisoner, 8612, we brought in a substitute, but he came in halfway through. And what's interesting is, day by day, as the situation degraded, we all adjusted to it. That each day's level of violence, of abuse, was a platform for the next day. But he comes in now, and he's seeing these crazy things going on. He says right up front, I'm not having any of this. And they told him, you can't leave. They won't let you leave, which we never said. In fact, 8612 was the one who told him, they won't let you out. And so he says, I'm going to go on a hunger strike. I'm not going to eat anything. I'll get sick, and they'll have to let me go. And he's a skinny kid to begin with. And the guards go crazy because he's now the symbol of resistance. All the other kids are broken. If they're not having emotional breakdowns, they're like zombies. They're doing whatever the guard said. And for the next 2 days, every guard on every shift, their mission is get this prisoner to eat those damn sausages. They put him in solitary confinement to make him hold the sausages. And to his credit, he resists. So he should have been the hero. He should have been the hero for the other prisoners. Instead, he becomes a troublemaker. The guards set the other prisoners against him. They said, if he doesn't eat his sausages, you don't get your visiting hours. If he doesn't eat his sausages, you guys don't get your blankets. If he doesn't eat his sausages, we're going to put your blankets in nettles and spurs, and you're going to spend hours digging them out. So they start jumping all over him. Eat the damn sausages. You know, you're ruining.
Even though these studies can no longer be replicated because of ethical concerns, essentially they demonstrate that ordinary people simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a destructive process. Warning, there are going to be some disturbing images on the next screen. These are all images of events that have happened with ordinary people. For the most part, these people did not set out to be evil or did not set out to be aggressive and violent. What happens when you put good people in an evil place? Does humanity win over evil, or does evil triumph? What type of guard would you have been? How can you be sure? If you were a prisoner, would you have been able to endure the experience? What would you have done differently than what those subjects did? If you were imprisoned in a real prison for 5 years or more, you think you could take it? Before moving on to the next PowerPoint, I would like you to watch Philip Zimbardo's TED Talk about the Lucifer effect. It's about 23 minutes long, and it's very interesting and insightful.